Okay, thank you members, and we are resuming our now meeting at agenda item 7, which is a briefing by Action Deaf Youth on the Sign Language Bill. Members' papers for this agenda item start at page 259. I would now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we are joined this morning by Ali May, and Ali May is a deaf young person. You're very welcome, Ali May. Ali May's mum, Brona, is also joining us this morning, and you're also very welcome. We are, Gemma McMullan is joining us, and Gemma is the mother of a young deaf child, George, aged 26 months, I think, Gemma? Yeah. Is that correct? And Julie Graham, who is Director of Services with Briefing by Action Deaf Youth on the Action Deaf Youth. So you're all very, very welcome to Committee for Communities this morning, and thank you for your attendance here today. I understand, and members will know, that Gemma and Ali May are here to provide some lived experience evidence rather than particular legislative expertise, and that's hugely important to us, and thank you for that. I understand that Julie, I think, will make a brief opening statement on behalf of Action Deaf Youth before we move on to questions from members. So, Julie, if you're content, please go ahead, and then we'll come to questions. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled to be here today to engage in this discussion around the Sign Language Bill. This is a momentous occasion for us. And we know that it was introduced in New Decade, New Approach back in 2020. And over the past 5 years, we've now got to this stage. It's actually hard to believe that we've managed to get here halfway through the decade. Just amazing. First of all, can I express our very sincere appreciation to all those who have done all the hard work in the background to enable us to get here today, and especially to our local deaf community, who have contributed a lot to this process, to the Sign Language Partnership Group, and also to the Department for Communities, who we do know have worked substantially in the background. For us, this bill represents a life-changing opportunity for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, and specifically for deaf children in Northern Ireland. And I am delighted to be here today to share our experience with yourselves in the committee. Speaking as the Director of Service Delivery and Development in ADY, you can see that I am deaf myself, but I'm very pleased to have alongside me today Ellie May as a young person and two other parents who I am going to let introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Gemma McMullan. My son's name is George, and he is 26 months. Not very old. He is moderately deaf, and he was identified as deaf when he was 8 weeks old. He is moderately deaf, and we have been learning sign language and been signing with George since he was 5 months old. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you. Hiya, my name is Ellie May O'Connell. My sign name is this, because of my curly hair. I'm 13, and I go to school in Victoria College. It is a mainstream school. I'm profoundly deaf, and I have been using BSL from I was very small. Hello, my name is Brona O'Connell, same as Ellie May. This is my daughter. Ellie May is my daughter, I'm her mum. Ellie May was diagnosed deaf when she was 2. When she was 4, we started to attend Action Deaf Youth. And that's when we started our journey with BSL and total communication for Ellie May. I have studied BSL up to level 4. And now that is the equivalent of a HNC or level 4 NVQ. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brona. Thank you, Ali May, or should I say... And you're really particularly welcome here today. I have to say, I think we as an institution really benefit from having young people's voices and experiences. And I know that you have had your own unique journey and your own experience with sign language, and it would be really useful and helpful if you could share some of that experience that you have seen with sign language throughout your life, and in particular when you moved into grammar school. What are your thoughts in terms of sign languages? How has it changed, and what would you like to see happening in the future?
Signing has been really helpful for me to communicate with people, and it's just amazing to have another language that I can understand. And when I don't want to talk or not wear my cochlear implants, I can just sign and just talk to my family. And if I want to have like private conversation with my mum, I could just sign without anyone knowing. In school, I have a classroom assistant who is also deaf, and I'm very pleased to have a deaf assistant who actually understands what you're going through as a deaf girl in a mainstream school, surrounded with all the hearing people. And it's really easy for me to talk to my assistant when there is a problem what's happening in school or home. I could just talk to her, and she can help me how to solve all my problems. And it's just amazing that what she's done for me for the past 2 years. All the work she's done to help me to do my work in school, and I'm just very pleased about it.
Thank you. And I should warn you, we have all done some sign language lessons, so be careful, we might understand. I think you're safe enough, to be honest. I don't think we've quite got there. But thank you for that. One quick last one for you, Ali May, just from me is, so you've got that support in school, in broader society, out at shops, out socialising, what challenges do you see, and how might things improve to make sure that those challenges are removed in the future?
I don't understand your question.
So do you find difficulty, so in your school people probably are very aware that you have that you are deaf. When you go into shops and things like that, do you find it more difficult? Do you find that there's a lack of understanding around your needs because it's not visible, it's not something that people know?
In shopping, it's not really difficult for me because, well, it just depends, because if there's a music background, it's very difficult for me to hear my parents when they're talking, or like the bridge sound is very difficult. But I do hear them a bit better, and I also my mum does sign language when there's a music background or I don't understand what is her questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ali May. Thank you. And I'll go to Julie and then I'll come to members. So Julie, I suppose, we've heard before about the importance of those early years and how those years are so crucial around language learning and the risks around language deprivation. Let's Play and Grow is clearly working hard to fill this space. I wonder, is it your belief that legislation or societal awareness or a combination of both are the best way to ensure the widest possible support for young people, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I would agree that currently in society there is generally more awareness happening now, but we all know that for every child, early language acquisition is crucial. And the key stage of development is that stage from birth up to 5 years old. And there is very clear research showing that for deaf children, it's actually 0 to 3 years old. Those first 3 years of life are absolutely crucial in that child's development. And research would indicate that if a deaf child has access to sign language in those very early years, up until they're 3 years old, it doesn't matter what they do later on in terms of acquiring speech or not acquiring speech. It's the initial access to language in those first 3 years of life, and specifically sign language, that has the biggest impact on their later development. And that is what influences most their later trajectory through life. That is that early language acquisition, which goes on to affect literacy, their reduced incidence of mental health, educational outcomes are better, employment opportunities then related to educational opportunities, and that is what creates the best outcome. It's that first 3 years of life, and that's why as an organisation we've worked really hard on developing those structures to put those services in with very young children, because that's where the biggest impact can happen and does happen, and that's now evidenced through research. So, my response to your question will be that the bill has the potential to create a better focus on these early years, because if we can change the experience in those early years, we change the trajectory of them as children, as young people, and on into their adult life. And so in my briefing paper, you'll have noted that I did give you some suggestions already of what we would like to see. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to explore that already. And I think that's what we would be looking for in relation to the early years provision.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Okay, I will now go to members. So at this point I have Kelly, Brian and Morris, then Sian. So Kelly, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Gemma, could I ask you first? You're learning sign language to be able to communicate with your son and to help him. What's the access like at the moment for sign language for the wider family?
So, in terms of ourselves as a family unit, it's me, George and his dad, Dean. Whenever we were told that George was deaf, we were given the option that hearing aids were the first and foremost thing that he was going to get. There was no mention of sign language as an option. It was, this is how we're going to fix George's hearing problem, and we were sort of sent home with no guidance, no charities, no leaflets, nothing. In terms of the wider circle, there is basically nothing. You know, we've been teaching our families the sign language. ADY do offer sign language for grandparents, which in my opinion is the only sort of access that they're going to get is through this charity. But for us as parents, we were given no guidance, no support in terms of sign language at all. There wasn't an alternative language. It was, you will get hearing aids for George and that will fix his hearing and he will go and live a life without any sign language, which we are hoping that this bill is going to change.
So do we. I think that hearing from yourselves and people with lived experience confirms that element of the bill where we ensure that training is available for family is key. But I think you've highlighted something that others have raised with us, is that within the health system, there isn't an automatic recognition that sign language as communication is as valuable as every other support mechanism. So the bill doesn't currently require sign language to be introduced at diagnosis. So perhaps that's something we can take forward. I would like to turn now to Ellie May. Thank you so much for today. Can I ask you, going through mainstream school with an interpreter has been a wonderful experience for you, but what happens when your interpreter has to go on holiday or is not well? Is there a replacement person that you can call upon, or how does that work?
So in my school we have two classroom assistants who knows sign language, BSL, but So one of them is hearing, of course my classroom assistant is deaf, she knows BSL. So when my assistant is on the way on holiday, I have on that classroom assistant, that Pacific, because one of the man in my school who is in charge of all classroom assistant, he will organise and make sure that I have a good classroom assistant who is not like don't know sign language but don't know about how, and they're aware of deaf people. So I have her and she is just really good, and so when my assistant is ill, so it just depends on what days. So maybe some day it's only for one day. I think I would be like fine. It depends what the subjects I have in my classes. But if I have a difficult day for all my subjects, I would have her to help me with all my work and making sure that I'm having the good support.
And can I ask, in your school, is there any classes or anything provided so that all of your friends or other teachers are learning sign language?
Well, when my assistant is talking to other people in my class, she is trying to teach my class to learn sign language, but it's very difficult for them because they would forget, and they don't, and it's very difficult for me to communicate because they don't know what to do, because even though they have deaf awareness, but they just don't know. They might be a little bit shy and they don't know if they're going to say the right words or the wrong words. But it is, but I'm just really want them to learn sign language, and also some of my teachers just the basics, so then they can communicate with me. But I just really want that in my school. But I just really want it.
Yeah. When you're travelling to and from school, do you get a bus?
No, because I live close there, so I walk.
Lucky you. Or maybe not lucky you, because then you can't be late. I'm just, actually, if I could come to you, Brona, as a parent, when your child's diagnosed, you want the best possible. Can you advise us as a parent, has there been anything that has really surprised you and taken you aback about the life of a young person who has hearing impairments or who's deaf, that really has shocked you, that needs to be improved, that we should be thinking about?
Well, Ellie had a late diagnosis, so she wasn't diagnosed until she was 2. So she really, as Julie has talked about, that language deficit between 0 to 3, Ellie had 2 years without language. And thinking back on it, we were very lucky about who we met along our way, who signposted various organisations and things that we could have met up with. And we had initially a teacher of the deaf who was all for total communication, which was using sign and voice at the same time. And I think that is what saved us. Whereas, anecdotally, from speaking to other parents, as Gemma said, that was never signposted to them. It was just, everything was to be oral. I think without sign language and having that ability to start signing with Ellie whenever she was 2 and very basic, that really did start our communication, because beforehand we couldn't communicate with Ellie because we didn't know that she was profoundly deaf. And to see her develop so quickly with the sign language was amazing. And we had a lot of people that said, don't sign, don't speak at the same time because it's not going to work. But with the sign, she was able to attach language, and her language then, spoken language, improved. I would say her sign language is still better than her spoken language, especially written. But it means that there was an avenue of true communication with us. And it wasn't then when we went to Action Deaf Youth, from she was 4, and I had the opportunity to learn alongside her, that she really blossomed. We did have the opportunity again for the BDA to come in to do home sign language with us, and we had the parents there and her 2 brothers and my husband. But it was a 6-week course. It wasn't tailored to a child's needs. It was like, what do you want to learn? Well, I don't know, I want to learn everything. So, you know, although the idea was very good, it could have been more structured. And I think then going into Action Deaf Youth and learning sign which pertained to a young person and helping me to help her acquire language, you know, with the big picture books, and this is a shirt and this is and how a 2-year-old, whatever, would learn their language. At 4, she was doing that, and she was attaching a language to sign. And that has continued on through her life, and that's why she still has a sign-in communication support worker in school. I think what has been the most shocking thing for me is, a most fearful thing I think is for me, is knowing how bright and how my daughter is. And I do feel that within mainstream education, she will not have the same access to her as her peers, and statistics show that deaf young people will perform worse at their GCSEs, etc. And it's having to advocate for her all the time. You do advocate for your child anyway, but you have to advocate in a more stringent way, I suppose. And it's that extra work we always have to do at home to make sure that she's catching up. Her school journey is much harder with regard to pertaining and getting her qualifications. And I know that she can be anything and anybody she wants. And I've learned that then through going to Action Deaf Youth and all the role models, deaf role models that she has had in and around her. And as well, her social struggles with friendship groups and things. And I know that young people will always have that difficulty as they grow up, but I do think it's harder for her. And again, it's that deaf awareness and that ability for true communication. And I think if you had the sign language bill coming in and you had that strong foundation for young people at the beginning with language acquisition, that will help their life chances, and also be a benefit for community as a whole, where people feel included and there isn't true inclusion, is I suppose what I'm trying to say.
I have one final question, and it's for Julie. Julie, I have a massive concern that the bill comes forward, but we don't have enough interpreters available to deliver all of the needs and to meet the needs for people who need interpreters, whether that be in health or education or travel, whatever. How long do you think it will take Northern Ireland to upskill enough interpreters to make the bill worthwhile?
Okay, I believe in clause 10 it addresses this area in terms of accreditation and increasing the pool of sign language interpreters and sign language teachers. So I know it is within the bill. I would suggest that within clause 3 and 4 of the bill that does address this. It talks about prescribed organisations, and we are assuming that they are public services. And I assume that education will be within those prescribed bodies. ADY feel, though, that education is crucial for our deaf children and young people, and that needs to be highlighted more. There needs to be a focus on that, and it needs to be referenced much more strongly. Because that will transform deaf children's lives. There will be better educational opportunities and outcomes with that, and therefore that will change everything than just bringing in more interpreters. So we really do need to go back to the foundational structures that are in place to address these. So I have put forward some suggestions about what could be the start of a journey. One example here is that in Northern Ireland we are quite different from the rest of the UK. because we already have a structure and a model of an Irish-speaking medium school. So we have that model, we have that structure in place, and we know what that looks like. Potentially long-term, could we look at a similar structure and a similar model and use that as a sign language school? That is an option. That's more long-term. I do appreciate that. And we do appreciate this is the start of a journey and we don't expect things to be changed instantly. But I would reinforce the need to address education, because the likes of George and Ellie May, it will then go on to give them more choices. Hearing children have choice when it comes to education, and why do deaf children not have that same choice? So that would be my strong recommendation to answer that question.
And just on that, the types of qualification for sign language teachers will be based on regulation, and there's no time scale for the regulation in the Act. Do you think that we should perhaps ask for a time scale for that? For the regulation to be made?
Timescales are useful, of course they are. Now, I'm not from a legal background, so I don't understand necessarily the procedures around this, but I would trust that the Assembly and DFC would probably know how that would work out best. Definitely timescales would be useful to have in place.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly and Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your attendance today, and all who are here with you. And thank you, Julie, for your briefing paper. Our purpose is to examine the wording in the bill, and it is helpful that you have set out specific suggestions and recommendations whereby we can seek to change and improve the wording in the bill. Thank you also, Gemma, for your personal testimony in the papers that we have received. And Ellie May, you're a great example of total communication that we hear others talking about. And I wanted to ask, one of the comments, Julie, in your paper is that many deaf adults wish they had attended a deaf school, but you say 77% attend mainstream school. When we've asked this question before, we've always been told ultimately it is a matter of that there should be a choice, and I'm interested, Ellie May, is that something you considered? And well, both of you, Julie and Ellie May, just for a bit more for your thoughts on that. When young people and families are weighing up that choice, is there enough provision for both in mainstream schools and in specialist deaf schools? Is it only Jordanstown in Northern Ireland, or how many specialist schools are there in Northern Ireland? Just the one?
Just the one.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Ellie May? Okay. As a deaf person, I will be sharing a bit of my life experience here as well. I became deaf at 7. I got meningitis and became deaf. I, at first, went to a mainstream school that had a deaf unit. I'm sure you've heard of mainstream schools, PHUs. So it had a deaf unit down in Bangor. The unit is now closed down, but that is where I initially started my education until primary 7. After that, then, when considering secondary school, I did visit various schools here, but I wanted to go to a deaf school. So I then went to England, because there's a deaf grammar school in England which boards deaf students. So I had that choice then, and that's the choice I made. But now Ellie May has been on a very different journey from mine. So Ellie May, do you want to talk about how you made that decision to go to Victoria?
So first I went to St. Bride's, which was a really good school. They had amazing accessibility for me to enjoy my life in primary school. And so I went to St. Bride's from nursery all the way to P7. And then when I finished that, I went to see other schools because I didn't do the transfer test, but I did the practice one, but not the actual one. And there's 2 schools that we accept my scores. And then I got into Victoria College, Belfast. Victoria is a good school. They all schools have good school for me, but St. Blaise and Victoria, they're amazing way to how for me to enjoy my life in school and picking the right subjects for me to actually understand, and I'm not like confused and taking a step back. I'm not enjoying my life. So then, but I would like them to maybe make more, encourage more people to come and learn sign language, and maybe make it a club for them to learn. So then, when they're meeting with deaf people, like maybe in with their friends, in their friend group in a different school or in outside a home or wherever, and they can practice and learn. And then it'd be really good for me. So then, when I'm not wearing my cochlear implants or whatever, I can communicate with them.
Well, it's helpful to hear 2 different approaches, and that it's up. The choice should be provided. You know, that is what we have heard. I want to just refer to, Julie, some of your comments. In clause 2(b), where in the bill it talks about arranging availability of classes for deaf children and their close families, guardians and carers to learn or have proficiency in the language. We've heard from others that of the importance of that early opportunity as soon as possible, and some have talked about a reluctance to teach sign language from some adults who think it might discourage spoken language. We have commented before that there needs to be stronger wording there to ensure that the availability of sign language is not delayed and is available at the earliest opportunity. And in clause 5, I think we're all dissatisfied with the consultation, where it talks about any future changes and regulations. The department must consult with one person or one group appearing to act on behalf of the deaf community, or at least one person or one group. So we have wondered how that could be improved, that wording. So you refer to a sign language partnership group or the establishment of a national advisory group, as in GB, I think. So whether you want to comment on either of those matters, how we could improve who should be involved in the consultation. It seems too weak to just say one person or one group. So how could that wording be improved?
Obviously, the wording on the bill as it stands, I mean, I can't comment on how you do that from a legal perspective, but what I would say is we need to look at what our goal is around this. Our goal is that we create a piece of legislation that works in practice, and that when it becomes law will transform the lives and the opportunities for deaf children and young people in Northern Ireland. That's what we're working towards. So whoever is being consulted should be people who themselves have experience and skills within this area. And for me, it's really important that deaf children and young people are included in that process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we need to see as the principle that we're aiming to achieve.
Okay, well, it's definitely an area that needs improvement, and we will seek to do that. And the last one I want to ask about, Chair, is in clause 11. where it defines members of the deaf community. And the wording in the bill, to me, is really the sign language community, because the wording that is here, if you don't use sign, I know that this is a sign language bill, but effectively, if you don't use sign language, you're not included in the definition of the deaf community. And you make the point that it needs to make sure it includes deaf children and parents of deaf children. But I just think effectively, it needs to make sure that it includes everyone who would see themselves as part of the deaf community.
We would absolutely strongly advocate that Clause 11, which already specifies certain groups, should also incorporate ensuring that all deaf children and young people are represented. I mean, you've heard from Gemma, you've heard from Brona, that so often the access for deaf children to sign language depends on signposting, which is currently not being given. And if you don't have signposting, then how do you access it if you don't have the information given to you? So again, that's not the bill's fault, but if you don't have that as a foundational point for deaf children at the point of diagnosis. So I think every deaf child will be included, but we've got to ensure that this is inclusive, every deaf child and every family with a deaf person in it, and that maybe needs to be spelled out a little bit more clearly, because parents are part of this. Parents need to be empowered to feel that they are part of what's going on here, because language starts at home for every child. And families are a key part of that child's journey. And that's why we would advocate that there would be those amendments to bring in those 2 points.
Yeah, and it relates to the earlier point about the promotion of sign language, so that even people who have not yet taken up the opportunity should be recognised if they have deafness, that they are part of the deaf community, and should be always the encouragement to learn sign language. And you've made the point that the earlier that happens, the better, otherwise you have language deprivation. Okay, thank you. Unless anybody wants to add anything.
I maybe make a point about whenever you said about education. I think if you had the likes of the courses available, picking a school would probably be less frightening for a parent, because obviously ultimately it's you, it's not your child picking their primary school. So at the minute I have made the choice not to send George to pre-pre, because I know more than likely that they're not going to be able to communicate him using sign language. So I have put off sending him to that. And then even picking his nursery school, if I knew that there was going to be even a 6-week course available for his nursery teacher, I would feel a lot more calmer sending him to nursery and then on to primary school. If I knew that his teachers were going to have access to that, it would make me a lot calmer on what school I was going to be able to send him to. But the pressure of knowing that that's at the minute not an option, then it's putting that pressure on parents a lot more. Where are you going to send your child? Do you send them to a deaf unit because you know that they're going to have access to sign language, or do you send them to mainstream and hope that they're going to get a classroom assistant that can sign? Just wanted to add that in.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I just add there, Ellie was talking about, her primary school and how great it was. I think it was her teacher of the deaf who really, I suppose, created like a little deaf hub. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 deaf children in her school, and her nursery school teacher taught herself sign, so that helped Ellie whenever she was in the nursery. And then throughout the school then there were the deaf children there, so there was always that support. You weren't the only one. And also then they invited Action Deaf Youth in to work with her class, teaching sign. I think you do it in Craigie Primary School, is that right? or there's something similar, a 6 to 8 week course. So it was all, and it's talking about inclusion. So it was all inclusive. Everybody, felt that they were together, and there was no difference. I think when you go into secondary school, it becomes more stark because there's not that same. It's more rigid, as in with lessons and timetables, and there's not that same freedom as primary schools to invite people in. Ellie is the only deaf child in her school, and that is a lot of pressure for her to feel. She feels that she is an outsider sometimes, and she spoke about that before. And about choosing schools for, Julie said that she went to England. So as parents, we have to make that decision. Do we send our child away to a boarding school in England, or can we not keep her at home? And that is, so we've made the decision to keep her at home. It's always in the back of our heads, if she starts to underperform, do we need to make that decision? But why should we send our deaf children to England to be educated? Why can't they be educated here in Northern Ireland? Even if it was a boarding school, maybe up the road or whatever, where you could visit or have her home at the weekend. But if you're sending your child away, who else needs to do that for education? So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Morris?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. I've raised it here before that I believe that there should be something within the curriculum itself to educate non-deaf children sign language, so that they in turn can communicate with a deaf person who is at their primary school. And I emphasise primary school because children at that age, their brains are like a sponge. They'll take in that type of learning very, very quickly and help communicate. And it's a question really for Ellie. If you had some sort of sign language education within the primary school when you attended primary school, could that possibly have made your journey a more pleasant experience? If you'd have had children who can hear but could communicate through sign language with you, growing up with you through that primary setting until post-primary, perhaps some of them then going on to post-primary school with yourself? Hard one.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I just don't know how to answer it. If I would go to a hearing, because obviously I'm already in a hearing school, but if I would just go and have more deaf people into my school, I don't really mind what year they are, but just someone to hang out with, and they would understand, and I would communicate with them. But in Victoria now, I'm just feeling like I'm the only kid in there, and I just don't know how to manage it. But when in my primary school, it was really simple for me to actually, because I have a deaf girl in my the year below me, that I was able to hang out every day. If I could do that, I would be delighted. I just can communicate with someone, and they would understand what you're going through with only deaf girl in your class for like the whole day, and you got no one else to actually hang out with. But in Victoria, it's just really difficult for me, and I just can't. It's really hard for me to manage it as a deaf girl in there, and it's just really hard for me. But if I would just encourage more people to come and maybe do assigning classes in my school, maybe during lunches or whatever, with someone who will actually understand, and I will be able to have fun. I can just be myself. But when I'm along with the hearing people, it's very hard for me to be myself, and I can't manage it.
Yeah, which is probably why I think that there should be some sort of sign language education in the mainstream primary schools, that all children can learn it, and it would help socially those who have got a hearing impairment to communicate with those who don't. And it also might set the pathway for future interpreters as they grow up, and I do think it's crucial that we need to do something, and we need to do it in an educational setting, and it has to be at primary school. And that's just my thoughts, that if all people are growing up together, they can learn to communicate, even if it's only partially. It may help people like yourself, Ellie, and it may help others who can hear, understanding a bit better the problems that those who can't hear encounter.
Could I just come in? I think really what Ellie's emphasising here very well is the important, it's not just about other people being able to sign, it's about deaf children and deaf young people being with other deaf children and deaf young people and having peers who are just like them. Everybody is as human, we all need to identify. We need to have people who we can identify with and people who are like us. And that's a really important point that Ellie May is reinforcing, and she's talking a lot about that. And I think that's probably Gemma's concern too for George growing up, not having deaf peers in the classroom.
Yeah, well, if we didn't go to Action Deaf Youth, I don't think we would have encountered another deaf child up to now. I know he's only 2, but in the last 2 years, we definitely wouldn't have encountered another deaf child. So it is nice to be part of that community. And I'll just give an example. Whenever we were at one of the play sessions, there was a girl who was refusing to wear hearing aids, and she seen a doll with hearing aids in, and she ended up keeping them in because she's seen, you know, the doll wearing the hearing aid. So it's just nice to be, you know, part of that community and being involved with other deaf young people.
That thing, I think, if you can see it, you can be it, and seeing other people. And I have to say, Gemma, I was very struck with something you said right at the start of your evidence. We said about the medical system kind of we're working to fix, George, and I think that struck me as something where it's about valuing. It's about that very rich culture and very unique and worthwhile. You know, that in itself has huge value, and that there's a lot to share there. So, and I have to say, Ellie May, you're doing more than well in terms of representing people with hearing difficulties. So,
Sharon, just it brings to mind one of the many junior football teams I played for over the years. There was 2 neighbours, and one had hearing difficulties and the other one hadn't. The chap that played the football hadn't taken any formal classes, but he had learned from his neighbour how to sign language, and they communicated very, very well. Actually, it was amazing to see them communicate so quickly, and that's where I'm coming from. He learnt that at a very young age, and I think it helps. Thanks for everything, Ellie May. I wish you well in the future.
Thank you, Morris and Sian.
Oh, hi, Ellie May. Is Sian? Hopefully I got that right. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming here today, and I think you're class. And I know that as a teenager, it's really tiring to just be a teenager, and you're carrying all of that at the same time. So, and also not many teenagers will be sitting in the Senate chamber of the Northern Ireland Assembly giving evidence to a committee. So you should be incredibly proud of yourself. My question, so hopefully I've got the sign right, and if I haven't, forgive me, but if you were a world leader, is that right? Maybe. For the day, what would you put in place to make it better for people like you? So if you,
I don't really understand your question.
So if you got to change, if you were in charge of this, what would you put in place that would change tomorrow to make it better for deaf children? If you were in our position, what would you put in this bill?
I would just... It's a hard question. I don't really know how to answer it, but
Well, why don't
come back to you?
Yeah.
If you have me thinking, I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I would love to know what you would like to see us put in this bill that would have either made your life a bit easier as you're going through, and what would make your life a bit easier now. So I'd really love to hear that. But don't worry, I won't put you on the spot.
And if I may, Ellie May, if an answer to that occurs, you can write back to us and give it to us in writing, the same as any of the other officials would be asked to do. So if you please consider that.
No pressure. I just think that your voice is one of the most important voices that we can hear. Gemma, oh my goodness me, the fact that you learned sign language postpartum is just exceptional and incredible, and just shows, I suppose, when you have the mummy, the mummy bear comes in.
Fight for your children, yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose what I'd just like to know, and it might not necessarily be something that we can put in this bill, but I think it's something that it would be really important to hear, what emotional support or what support kind of went around your family at the time of that diagnosis.
Probably crap, was it?
Okay, sorry.
No, come back to me.
Okay, no problem. And again, I think it was something that the chair had said as well, the fact that that approach to this something to fix, and I think what's come really clearly both from Ellie May and yourself is that this is much more than a medical condition. This is an identity, and it's an entire holistic issue that I think I hope that we get reflected in this bill. Julie, I'll come to yourself, and hopefully I won't make anybody on the spot or get upset, but I suppose for me, how can we ensure that the voices of children and young people are meaningfully represented on something like the National Advisory Group or the Sign Language Partnership Group? So how do we make sure that they're at the heart of that?
Well, I think that is something that does need to be considered. Because as you've seen today, adults talking on behalf of children isn't as good. And that's why ADY brought Ellie May here today. And brought parents here today as well. Because the bill is about empowering deaf sign language users to speak up for themselves, not have people talking on their behalf. And that's why I really wanted to make sure Ellie May was here today. We need to create some sort of a system so that their voices will have input throughout. And little deaf children also have a very strong voice that needs to be heard. Even our very young deaf children can contribute their views to the process. How we do it will obviously be very different. We need to be creative, but it's something that needs due thought. Because the deaf children who come to ADY, they can tell us what they want very clearly. George is only 2 and he can tell you what he wants. They all have their way of doing it, and those ways may be different, but we do need to find a way to capture those voices.
My background was a youth worker before I was an MLA, and it was about that, bringing young people to the table in a meaningful way. And I think when I think about what I experience as an MLA and the engagement we have with the voices of young people at the heart of our decisions, can sometimes be quite poor. And then when you add in an extra layer then of whether the young person is deaf or has lived experience of something, I think that's even more challenging. So I think that's a really, really key point, which is why I wanted to ask. You can absolutely write.
No, I think I'm ready. No, it was. You probably read it in my blog post. Whenever we were told George was deaf, you just think of worry, guilt, whatever emotions you feel. But Julie sort of then, whenever I got in contact, she wrote, "Congratulations on your baby. You have to remember." Sorry.
Take your time, Gemma. No rush.
That their deafness doesn't define them, but we need to support them as best we can, and this bill really helped to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate, and I'm really sorry.
But there was no emotional support, and to answer your question, apart from when we got in contact with the charity, there was no support in the hospital at all. The consultant was in and out in a minute to say, you're going to be fitted for hearing aids, all the best, goodbye, this is your baby, off you go. There was no emotional support whatsoever from the consultants, especially. To hope that answered your question, but
no, it absolutely does. And I think for me it goes back to really showing the importance of the community and voluntary sector as well, in terms of filling those gaps and really offering that support. One last thing, Delma, please come back to us and write to us. The other thing is, I'm really jealous that you have a secret language with your mum that you can say things about. So that is a bit of a superpower, to be able to say things without everybody else knowing. But thank you so much, all of you.
Okay, well listen, thank you everyone, and any other questions, members? If not, I'll just thank all of you. And Julie, I want to say it's been very, very clear throughout the session the work that you're doing to fill the gap that we are now trying to do with proper support, proper legislation, has been remarkable, and thank you for holding that. Go ahead.
Would you mind,
Brian.
Chair, if I just ask?
Go ahead.
I'm interested, Ellie, May, to ask you, your spoken English is very good, and you're able to hear through the cochlear implant, but are there circumstances, if you were relying on the cochlear implant, are there circumstances where that is difficult for you to communicate? I'm thinking maybe in group situations where lots of people are talking, and are there certain maybe circumstances in which you prefer to rely on sign language rather than using the implant and spoken word, that it makes it easier for you to communicate? In what situations would you prefer to use sign language rather than relying on spoken and the implant?
I really love the way when I don't have my cochlear implants on, or if my cochlear implants die and I don't have the batteries with me during school time, I would love the way that the teachers would maybe do the basic sign language to say, like, I'd be saying, like, oh, my cochlear implants die, I don't have the battery with me. I would love the way when they can learn a little bit of sign, so then when they're talking, I'm not like concentrating on the lip reading, I'm more concentrating on the emotion, the face expression they're having, and the body movements and the way the hands are going. But I would love when they can maybe say, like, I'd be saying, like, oh, my cochlear implants are, then they can like maybe do a bit of signs, so, or write things on the board, so then I can make maybe draw some a little bit of pictures, so I'm like, oh right, I know what they're talking about. But when it's in the PowerPoints, they don't add any pictures, and I would just really want them to add pictures, because if there's a word that I don't understand, and if my classroom assistant is not in or at the back of the room, I'd be like, what's that word mean? And I don't understand. Then when I look at the picture, it would be making more sense, like, oh right, I know what they're talking about. But it's just very difficult for me, because I would just want them to know sign language, and I can understand a little bit more, and it'd be easy for me to communicate. And around group works, it'd be very difficult, because the background noise, everyone talking, and when we're going outside, it's still a little bit difficult. Still, my group would be still talking and over, but I would want them to talk, just talk one of them talk, and then they would talk one, and then they would face me, making more the lighting better and turn off the music and everything to make it more silent. But when it's come to that, they don't do it, and it's really difficult. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then if I'm asking something like, oh, what are you talking about? They would tell me what they're talking about, but not in a nicer way. They were talking in a rude way, and I just feel offended, and I feel like, oh, they don't want me to be included. And I just want them to be more open and knowing sign language, so that maybe me and my friend, we can have like a conversation without anyone knowing. Or, like, if I'm having a problem or something, I would just tell them. But if I don't have a problem, I'm like, what were you saying? What are you saying? And it's just really difficult, and I would love to wait just to do that.
Well, it's important to hear that the implant
And also
doesn't benefit every situation.
Yeah.
It's not the solution to enable your proper communication.
And also when people they're thinking, oh, cochlear implants can hear everything, they're not like, it's like you can hear again, but that's not it.
Yes.
I can hear, but not as well as a hearing person. I still have to like repeat or something, but I just don't like when people are just saying, like, turning their backs on me and talking, and then I'm like, then they're just saying, like, and then saying, like, when you can sign, when you're signing, then they're like, oh, you can, then why can you not hear? And then when you're like talking, you say, like, oh, you can hear, but just that's not it. It's not because I just talk, as I do, but just annoying when people are just like, no, they're not thinking the way as a deaf person or the deaf community where they're thinking of it, and it's just not right.
Okay, no, thank you.
Ellie was looking to come back in a brief final one.
Ellie May, I love you because when these are out, I don't hear it the same as everyone else, and the noise is dull, and nobody else understands that. So I get it, and thank you so much for bringing this up in committee, because it's very hard for me to explain to everyone what it's like living with moderate hearing loss and how tiring it is trying to read lips, hear people, understand the words, the noise, bad lighting, bad lip reading, all of that. So thank you for making that so real. And I'm going to have to put these back in now because I can't hear very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Daniel, briefly, please.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. A lot of the questions were covered. We are hugely in support of this bill, and it is so reassuring to hear how this is going to directly impact and benefit all of your lives. So we deeply appreciate you being with us today. Ellie May, can I say you're the most inspiring young person that I have ever met in my entire time as an elected representative. And you should be very proud of yourself. And your family should be very proud of you, because what you've done today is stand up for an entire generation and community who'll be very proud of the work that you're doing with the others on the panel. So thank you for that. Be proud of yourself for that, because I'm very inspired by you today. I'm very proud of you. And Gemma, the challenge of becoming a parent has its own demands and uncertainties. You have give voice, if I could say that, to so many people across our society, and offered a reassurance and hope that has not existed for a very long time. And you've sent a signal across all departments by this session today and through this bill, and all of us as advocates of this bill, that things are going to change. So thank you for your leadership. Indeed, Julie and Brona as well. This is one of the most interesting sessions that we've had. Deeply emotional. I could feel it in each of you. And many of us in society take for granted the things that we've been blessed with in life. We don't always appreciate the real challenges that exist in the lives of others. But I hope if this Assembly achieves anything, that we can have a very direct and positive benefit that will transform the lives of an entire community that in truth has been forgotten about for too long. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Daniel. And so, yeah, absolutely. As I was saying, Julie, the fact that you have been filling the gap, and organisations like yourselves, is remarkable, and hopefully the day of when people have to rely on that is coming to an end, and people can expect, as of right, to receive the supports. I also want to thank Gemma and Brona both for your advocacy and your, and that comes across very strongly and very clearly today, I have to say. And I think, Brona, as you said, that you have to be that bit more stringent to fight for your child, and that's something that you shouldn't have to do. As Ellie May says herself, and I think the word came across most strongly from you, Ellie May, for me, was inclusion, and the need and the right to be included. You have certainly been included here today in this committee, and you have brought the voice of all of your community into this room today in a very, very powerful way. And I do want to say this, and I mean this genuinely, your evidence here today in front of this committee has been remarkable in the sense of how confident you have been, how concise you have been, and how clear you have been. And I mean, when I say this, much more clear than many of the adults we have in this room who haven't had to deal with. So I really want to, and I'm sure, Brona, you're proud, I'm sure, every day, but you should be really proud today, and that has been a remarkable session, a remarkable insight into the needs, and a remarkable focus on us to ensure that this bill is as good as we can make it, so that at long last you start to receive the services you deserve as of right. But thank you for that very much today, and sincerely best wishes for the future from all of us. So if I could ask everyone just to stay where they are and maybe take us out of broadcast. We're going to have to take a short break again, members, to reset things. So if we could come out of broadcasting, please.